I'm Lazarina Stoy, and this is SEO in 2024.
Lazarina, what's your number one SEO tip for 2024?
So my tip is to incorporate programmatic approaches, and specifically I'm referring to rule-based automation for SEO best practices and AI-driven automation for process enhancements. So mainly, this means just taking some time to better understand different programmatic approaches, learning how to incorporate them in a way that is responsible, both in line with brand voice of the company you're working for and content quality. But again, not doing that just to spew out content, but to do that to satisfy search intent and actually be helpful for users. So what I'm saying sounds a little bit generic, so let me introduce two approaches that I think would be very useful for people to understand about how to incorporate this tip. So the first one is rule-based automation. This is very good for creating predefined instructions or conditions that generally dictate how specific tasks and processes should be executed without having someone to intervene or monitor. And examples of where you can apply such automation is mostly to the very well-known best practices that we have from Google that are very specific. So this could be making sure that all pages have titles, headings, making sure the headings have keywords, making sure pages have meta descriptions, that image have captions, making sure that there are inserted internal links and internal linking models, breadcrumbs, whenever certain phrases are mentioned, or just to promote semantically related pages. And it could also be something a little bit more complex, like triggering structured data generation at the mention of certain phrases, like how to in the title and things like that. And then on the other hand, we see a rise in AI models, which can be extremely helpful for a variety of tasks, but we're also seeing misuse of these models. And so I think that it's important to emphasize to people that AI-driven automation can be extremely helpful for tasks that are not mission critical. So these tasks can be things like automating content generation, having content enhancements or even summaries, having content translation. But these tasks absolutely should have someone monitoring the output and optimizing it. So, of course, I'm a huge proponent of these algorithms being used, but they should be used for improving processes and not as something that is served to the end user.
Great. Okay, so programmatic in the past has been a very rules-based approach. Now, obviously, over the last year or so, we've had an advancement of AI. So how do we know what to focus on a very much of a rules-based approach in terms of automations and what to use AI for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think rule-based approaches are things that we should seek out from Google's guidance and the guidance of other search engines. So things that in the past, SEO as an industry didn't really have that good guidance on how it should be done. But I think now in the year of 2023, 2024, it's really a lot better documented what works and what doesn't. So for everything that we have a set guidance that has been systematically proven for that this thing is helpful to users, that it improves rankings, and that it is kind of like a set best practice. These are the kind of things that we should be thinking to automate through rule-based automation. And the examples that I gave are very kind of commonplace now, having a title, having headings, breaking down the text into paragraphs to ensure that it reads well on a mobile device, things like that. And of course, these can be built into the processes of the people creating the content, like writers, and kind of building your own checklist. But it can also be a lot more automated, like building a system to automatically flag when something is off. So these are very good examples of kind of having a rule-based automation approach.
And what would be examples of some SEO tasks that you would use programmatic for, but you wouldn't utilize AI as part of that?
So I think there are a lot of tasks that, you can apply rule-based automation without utilizing AI that are more about, let's say, what length should titles be, how many headings should you choose, and kind of like generic advice. You don't necessarily need AI. You can use AI as part of the process, but I'm just saying that you don't need it in order to make that successful. Just at the stage of, having a meta description, having the heading, having the title. And then I'm giving very generic examples. I hope that consultants know what I'm referring to. And then you can use AI to enhance the output. So the difference is more making sure that you have the best practices implemented in processes, and then at that stage, incorporating AI to make the output better, as opposed to simply relying on AI just to spew out a page and kind of make sure that that page is optimized for SEO just because you told ChatGPT or another sort of tool to act as an SEO consultant if you wish. So the difference here is that you should lead with SEO best practices when you are designing, the content patterns of your pages, how they should be structured, what is needed in order to cover a topic comprehensively. And then you can incorporate AI to kind of help speed up the process, whether it's for generating content or for translating it or for repurposing it. But just the caveat here is that if you have a very good approach that is rule-based, you might not necessarily need that much intervention at the final stage. But when you have an approach that is entirely based on AI, you absolutely should have someone to check the output, because otherwise there are a few things that could happen. The first thing is that over time, you will lose your individuality in terms of brand voice. You might see content being published that is not necessarily aligned with best practices, both in terms of how cohesive it is. We know that if you're relying on AI tools for content automation, for instance, you might see misinformation, you might see things being generated that are not really factual at all. And then even for other tasks like translation, it's not really a good localization exercise. So besides brand voice, besides having a non-cohesive element, you might also see other things like losing that touch with the user because they are seeing that the content is not really based in actuality, it's not really based on experience, it's not really based on authority. And overall, while you might think that you are following a strategy and you are executing contents like you're publishing regularly, it might not be the quality content that both search engines and users are looking for. So this is why you should have kind of a human intervention when you are relying on such tools.
So what's the best page type to start programmatic with? So I'm imagining an SEO interested in using programmatic maybe hasn't used programmatic in the past. Is there a certain type of page, maybe a blog post template or some sort of initial landing page that you would reckon on focusing on initially?
Yeah, so I can't think of a particular page template, but I can provide some examples of when you might start thinking about programmatic SEO in general. So the difference between programmatic SEO for someone that is really unaware of this term and doing something programmatically is that programmatic SEO is kind of based on principles that are, first of all, to provide new information, satisfy the user, but do that through a programmatic means. So if you look at, for instance, keywords at the stage of keyword research, you might be looking at things that have a particular pattern. So this could be like your category pages, your product pages, because you are organizing content in a particular page template and page pattern. Another example could be in blog posts and kind of niche site, thinking of entities when we talk about entities, like things that are defined with different attributes. So let's say, for instance, a dog would be an entity and the food that they eat would be an attribute. Just a very random example. And then if you pivot that to programmatic SEO, you might have examples like types of food that dogs eat, or whether it's a fruit or a vegetable and things like that. So when you think of keyword research at this kind of stage, you might find a lot of examples to start with programmatic SEO and kind of using templates to go through the different variables that your attributes have. So in the case of the example that I gave, the different foods, let's say, or the different types of food, whether it's canned or kibble and so forth. And then this could give you a very good indication of which particular elements of the page you can template. And just to kind of give a very practical example of where people could find a very good use case for programmatic SEO and kind of rule-based approaches. Recently, I reviewed a case study for G2 and how they do kind of their category pages. So they are a reviews website and they have different category pages for, let's say, for instance, CRM software or ERP software. And within that, they have different ways of incorporating both rule-based automation and AI-driven automation for generating very small sections of the content. They use rule-based approaches for templatizing their headings. Let's say, for instance, what is ERP software? What are the benefits of using ERP software? What types of companies use that? And then they just simply change out the category. And they also use rule-based approaches for inserting particular links and for organizing the page template for all of these types of category pages. And now if we take a look backwards to implementing this approach, there could be multiple different businesses and niches that could benefit from this. Like, for instance, if you're an e-commerce store, working on category pages, working on product pages, and then taking that approach backwards to see what are the different best practices that you're not currently implementing and how you can brew those into the processes that you have for publishing pages. And then also thinking about the content that you're missing or the different content elements like captions for images, meta descriptions, titles, and how those can be improved as well. And then, of course, using very tailored machine learning models to help you in the execution of those tasks, but not as a kind of the end approach that you use for overall doing everything on the page.
I never thought of as a dog as an entity and dog food as an attribute, but I haven't got a Lazarina brain, so maybe that's why. But I mean, if you're using that kind of approach to produce content or produce content templates, how do you double check that what you're producing actually makes sense and you don't end up with a dog eating goldfish or something random and that just doesn't work and will be really silly?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So something that is very important when you are doing programmatic SEO and when you're trying to create, content using programmatic means and kind of using that approach, it's very important to have a very cohesive database and a strategy. So the strategy is very important because you not only want to know everything that you are planning to cover with this approach, but it's also important to kind of sense check the different avenues that you can take your keyword targeting. And also the database is very important because you want to make sure that you are not replicating content that is already available somewhere just because you want your pages to look better or to kind of manipulate rankings. You want to actually provide new information. So I think every programmatic SEO project or every even page enhancement starts with doing what you see your competitors doing. But I think the difference in what separates successful examples from non-successful examples is going that step further and actually adding unique information to your pages to make sure that you're providing user value. And if I can circle back to the example of G2, because I think that's something very accessible that everyone can access and see what I'm talking about. On their category pages, they provide a graph of sorts that provides a perception map of all of the ERP software that they have in their database and how they rank based on different characteristics. So this is a great example of using your own database as a company to provide a value to the user that they could not find elsewhere. So this particular perception map could be a very good example of something unique that they have added to the page, which might be a quality signal both to users and also to search engines that they should prefer that page. And so to kind of summarize my response here, to make sure that you are providing value for users, you should start by doing a very well-organized database that has a cohesive keyword targeting strategy. And that strategy should be aimed on covering the topic in a way that is complete and robust. And also you should be focused on making sure that you provide unique value to those pages and not just replicating what everyone else is doing. And that applies, I think, to all pages that you build. And, when it comes to blogs and product and all that sort of stuff, just not just replicating what's already there, because we know very well that there are not only sustainability issues related to that, but also web quality issues and user experience issues that come with that. So you definitely don't want to be on the site that you have a website full of pages that are not really unique or helpful in any way.
If an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing now so they can spend more time focusing on programmatic in 2024?
So this kind of complements what I'm talking about. So I hope that people get the importance of me saying that. So they should stop doing things manually that they can do programmatically. And I'm talking about things that are becoming very much a low importance factor in terms of rankings and value to users, but they are still considered best practice. So I'm talking about things like manually writing meta descriptions, manually writing image captions, especially for very large enterprise websites. These are the things that I see a lot of people kind of struggling and putting a lot of time and effort in, where in fact we have very advanced and robust APIs that can do the job to at least 90%. And then having someone simply review and improve those would be a much better use of people's time.
Lazarina Stoy is an SEO and data consultant. You can find her over at lazarinastoy.com. Lazarina, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2024.
Thank you.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2024, the book, over at seoin2024.com.